Hey, I want to show you guys today about a new extension package from Access Group called qExt. You can find this on github.com/Access Group, and I actually have Access Group web developer John Bellizzi with me who created this package. How's it going, John?
Hey Sparrows, how are you?
Good, good. So today we want to show you what the package is, how you can use it. We find it helpful for extension development, but I won't steal John's thunder. John, can you tell us a little bit about qExt and what it's supposed to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So while developing extensions at Access Group, we noticed that we were running into a lot of the same processes over and over again, continually spinning up different development environments, as well as having to deal with deployment configurations. And we noticed that there were a lot of steps we were taking that were just repeatable processes that we tried to automate. And our solution to that was this package, qExt, which allows us to utilize Webpack and other JavaScript build technologies so that we could easily spin up and get going a ClickSense extension project with pretty much just a single line of code from the command line. And qExt will set up all your project directories, install all dependencies that you need, and all you need to do is start running Webpack to watch your files, and it'll automatically take in your extension files, zip them up, and put them in wherever the right place is, whether you're working on desktop or on a Sense server environment.
Perfect. So essentially what we're doing is, quickly spinning up a package that has, for an extension that has ES6 capabilities, it has bundling, all this kind of stuff. So we can do more kind of modern web development with extensions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So I think the best way for people to figure out how to use this is for us to show them. So I think our idea today was to build a simple KPI extension. We'll add some features like being able to type in a measure in the properties panel so you can get kind of dynamic with click. And we'll even add kind of a toggle feature to change the CSS. So maybe we'll toggle the KPI between kind of like a light theme and a dark theme. So the first thing we'll do, I want to get started with this package. John, I believe the first thing I'll do is install this thing globally, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So qExt will be run from the command line, and ideally we would like to set it up so that we can run it from any directory where we want to just start working on a project. That way, we're not worried about, specifically working out of the ClickSense extensions folder, whatever. We can use this project globally. So we'll just do an npm install global.
Cool. So we'll install the package globally so we have it accessible everywhere. So I'll set that up. I probably already have it installed, but we'll see. There we get the latest version. Okay, so that's installed. So now I want to create an extension. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go find a directory to do that in. Let's see, I'll just create a folder called... So the way this package works is that you kind of develop these files in a format that ClickSense isn't necessarily going to be able to read an extension, but then it can bundle them up into that format, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So again, we are trying to utilize newer web technologies such as ES6 and other bundling tools so that we can create different modules for our extension files. I know, at least in our experience, our extensions can get fairly complex, so we like to utilize all the different tools that we can and allow Webpack to compile all that down into a single build that can be just shipped off into ClickSense.
Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my actual source code for this extension outside of my ClickSense environment. So I'm going to make a directory away from that because we're going to actually deploy the final code into that environment using this tool, but we don't need this. We don't need ClickSense looking at the actual source code that we're going to write. So I'm just going to make a directory and go into that directory. It'll just be a folder where I can put kind of extension source code. Okay, so I want to create my new extension. John, I want to call it, we'll call it toggle KPI, or how about this theme KPI, because it can switch between two themes. It's a kind of a goofy name, but okay, so what do I do to set that up?
Yeah, so really all we have to do now is we just run qExt by typing that into the command line qExt, and we just need to pass it two different parameters here. So the first is we're gonna call create extension. That's what we're trying to do here, create a new project. So create dash extension, and then we'll pass it the name of the extension.
Okay. Should I
which,
do it like this, caps or lowercase, or what are your uppercase, the first letter? What is it? I guess I'll do it like this. This is probably more.
yeah, that's probably fine. And this is the name that is going to be used again for the extension. That's going to set the .qext file for your extension as well as the main JavaScript file. And
Got
this is
it.
kind of what you'll see when you're actually looking at the kind of name identifier of the extension in ClickSense. So it's important that you, in this case, abide by the ClickSense extension naming standard, which I believe is one word
Right.
for your extension. And the other thing that we'll want to do is this is an optional parameter that we can pass, but in order to, again, take advantage of the technologies that we're using, there are certain dependencies that qExt has, and we're going to go ahead and install those. So in order to tell the project to install that, we're just going to exactly type dash dash install.
Okay, so I'll run that. It should spin up a folder for me called theme KPI with like my extension in it. It's installing a bunch of dependencies, so I can just kind of like get going with the package immediately. What we're gonna see when that's done is because it's spinning up, a package with npm etc. And with this with Webpack for building things, we can add more libraries to that, and I think that's gonna be part of our requirements coming up here. So we'll just give this a minute to finish. So while it's finishing, maybe I'll give some flavor on the requirements. So one thing we're going to want to do with our KPI is we want to have number formatting automatically. So if we put in a very large number, we don't want to show all these digits that may not be significant. Maybe we want to just show a couple of digits there. So, well, we can use a package from D3 actually. D3, everyone is kind of familiar with it as a great visualization library, but it's also very modular and it breaks out all its functions into smaller little modules that you can import. And a lot of those modules really don't have to do with visualization, but more just like working with data in general. And one really nice one from there is their number formatting module, which gives you tools for taking a number and producing some sort of visual representation of it in different formats, whether it's comma separated or with a certain amount of significant digits or whatever it might be. So we can utilize that today to kind of make sure our KPI looks good regardless of what size of number it is. So we have this package now. So if I look in this folder, I have a folder called theme KPI. So I'm going to go ahead and actually open my window here. We're going to go up to my documents. There's sense extension source. There's theme KPI. And there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm going to go ahead and open this with a code editor so we can take a better look. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code for this exercise. So we'll say File, Open Folder. We'll pick in Theme KPI. Okay, so I've got this folder open. Do you want to walk me through it a little bit here, John?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main area where we're going to be working in is this source directory that you've just expanded. So here you'll see pretty much all of the different files or function objects that can be included in our extension. So you'll probably notice a lot of these if you've worked with extensions before. We can see that we have a JavaScript file for our paint function, another one for resize. We also have a controller and so on. If we go to uh, our file in here called themekpi.js, this is our entry point for the code. And again, this is kind of the standard format of the extension object that we need to return back to ClickSense that you will all probably be familiar with. And we can see here again, we're taking advantage of the import and export calls here so that we can import the different functions or objects that we're using and pull them right into this object that we're returning back to ClickSense that is pretty much the entire package of our extension object. So I don't think that we'll be using every file in here for the extension that we're doing today, but just know that most of the properties or types of extension objects that you'll need will be available in this source directory. Another subdirectory that we'll see in here is the assets directory. And when the project is built, there's nothing in there, but this is primarily for any resources or assets that you may need to include in your extension, such as images, SVG files, whatever it may be. And this will allow us to basically import or reference these images into any part of our extension code from either our CSS, HTML, or even within our JavaScript.
Great. So if we need to include like images and things like that, we can put them in the assets folder. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, cool. So let's start configuring then. Pretty simple, right? All of this kind of handles the building for you. So it's really just about updating these files and adding your own code. So maybe the first thing is just to set up the qExt file, right? In a normal extension. This is metadata. So we'll call this kind of the theme KPI. And we'll just say my new KPI object. And we'll just call this the Spiros and John extension. And everything else looks good there, so I'll save that. Let's go ahead and look at the JavaScript file. We already looked at that. It's not really doing much, but we do have a paint file, right? And so we have paint, and it's got an element and a layout. We also have an HTML file, and it says kind of chart container in here. It's just got some boilerplate in there. And maybe I'm going to change that and say theme KPI just to see that output. Now, John, I've made a couple changes here, right? I called this theme KPI, and I've changed the name of this extension. What do I do next? How do I actually deploy this thing into my ClickSense desktop so I can take a look at it?
Right. So now we want to start running the Webpack watch so that it'll start bundling this up and deploying it to the correct location. So if we go to our package.json file, where we have all of our defined dependencies as well as predefined scripts that come with qExt, we can see that there's a list of options here for different ways that we can build or watch or deploy the extension. And some of these are just a few different combinations of actions that we can take. So the main actions that we have available are first the build of our source directory, which is doing a single build through Webpack to bundle up all of our code. We can also alternatively do a watch Webpack, which will allow us to continually monitor, watch the files. Anytime there's a change that's saved, it'll bundle that up and deploy it into or save it into our build directory. And we can also pair that command with a deploy command, which again will allow us to deploy our object to the desktop or the server. Now, we can set this up, we can start running this. The first thing we need to make sure of, though, is that we're actually pointed to the correct location for our deployment. So if we actually go to the file called deployment.config.json, we can see here that it's pretty much almost set for us. There's just one thing that we need to change. In the section at the bottom that says desktop, we have defined an object within desktop, and there's a destination property. We wanted to just update the value of that and point it to the correct directory. So in this case, Spiros, we want to make sure, right, that it's pointing to your username and to your documents ClickSense extensions. Again, for ClickSense extensions, whenever we are deploying these for desktop, this is the specific directory that ClickSense desktop is looking for your extension objects. So we want to make sure that we're telling qExt before we start bundling and deploying exactly where it is that it needs to deploy the package. And up above too, we can see we're not going to mess with this now, but we can see we also have options for setting up server deployment. And in that case, all we need to define if we were using the server deployment is the host name as well as the user credentials, or really just the username for the account that's deploying.
Got it.
For now, we'll leave that as is.
Right, perfect. So we have the desktop, the destination. I want to put this extension, I want it to get built into this Sense extensions folder under my username. So we've set that up. As John said, in the package, we have a bunch of different build scripts. The names are fairly self-explanatory. Build means build it one time. Watch means keep building it every time a file changes. So we're going to be doing some active development and watching changes. So we're going to use watch. We're going to use the Webpack build process to do all the bundling we need with these ES6 features. We're going to deploy it to that desktop location. So I can just run this script. I will use just a shell here since I already have it. Or I guess I don't have it here. We'll go ahead and use codes terminal. So I can say, well, real quick, let's go to ClickSense desktop and just show that it's not there. So I will pull up a new app here. We'll just call it the theme KPI app. And we'll open that app. Let's just go to the data load editor and put some random data into it. So add a little script. Nope. So if you, in the load script, if you hold control and hit 0, 0, it'll generate a random script for you with like some random dimensions and numbers. So it's really useful for doing development, kind of test development. So let's load that data. And now we can go back to the front end. We'll create a new sheet, and in that sheet, let's go ahead and just add a couple list boxes just to see this thing in action. So put one on there. And looking at the charts, or the extensions rather, we'll see there's no kind of theme KPI down here. But we want to add one. So like you were saying, John, I want to run this script. So I'll say npm run watch webpack deploy desktop. And what that should do is build it into that directory and then keep building it every time I make a change. So I'm going to go back to qExt. Oh, actually let's do the development in the browser actually, so that we can see, we can use the terminal or the console to kind of inspect things and all that fun stuff. In fact, I'm going to pull it up right now so we're not caching any changes. And what I will do is click edit here, and if I go to extensions now, what I should see is theme KPI, which previously wasn't there. So what happened when I ran that script is it built my code and put it into action, and now if I pull it up there, you see it says theme KPI, which was that change we had before. Now what's cool about this, the way that we've got it set up here, is that if I go back to my code editor and make a change, like this is the theme KPI, and I click save, you'll see it actually rebuilds it instantly. When I come back here and just refresh the page, I now have that new code being deployed directly in there. So you can kind of rapidly make changes. So let's go ahead and move a bit quicker and kind of put this extension together. Again, we're going to want to have a KPI. So what we're going to do is really create a few different placeholders here. You can use Angular 1 kind of template binding in extensions. It's not fully supported, so I'm not going to show that today, but we will just at least use this template HTML file. So maybe we'll make kind of like an H2, and that'll be like where the KPI title lives. And then we'll make a little span here, and that'll be where the metric itself, metric value lives. So I'll save this. And what I want to do is set up some properties of this extension. So let's do just the numeric input property first. So we'll go to the definition of the extension, and we'll say we have items settings. That's fine. But what I want to do next is I want to add a string property to this. We'll just piggyback off of these settings. So we'll say items, and we'll call it my metric. We'll give it the reference against the generic object will be metric, and the label will be my metric, and the type is string, and I believe the syntax is expression, and we'll say always. We'll also give that a label, so maybe we'll put that above here. We'll copy and paste this and say my label. We'll call this label. Just call this label as well. In this case, we're not going to use an expression, so we're just going to say no expressions for the label. I know that's a controversial decision, but to keep this one simple, we're not going to do that. I know that was a much requested feature in qExt to have dynamic labels. So I save that. I've configured it. I go back and refresh this thing again. And just like any extension that's going to show up in the properties panel now, we haven't gotten to the point of really using ES6 features yet, but we will. Okay, so the general tab, I have the label tab, I have my metric. We could have configured this to have those both in the same sub-panel. We're not going to worry about those kind of specific implementation details today. But let's say I have a label, and so I'm going to say this is sales, and then I'm going to have a metric, and I'm going to call it just sum of expression 1, which is in the data set. And now what I can do in my paint file here, of course, is I can take the element, pick off the element from the Angular wrapped element coming in, and I'll say let's get the header. So I'll call the h2 equals element dot query select h2, and we'll get the span. Query select span, and we'll say h2 dot inner html equals layout dot label span dot inner equals layout dot metric. We'll save all of that stuff and refresh this. Query select is not a function. Element.query selector, excuse me. Do that again. Okay, so we have sales and an H2 and a number, 255433. This number is pretty small. We should probably add some CSS to it. Again, all the loading of the CSS is taken care of for you. And in fact, we have actually Sass set up, so we can do write some SCSS. So what I can do here is I'll add a class just right in the template. I'll call it. Whoops, where's the template? There it is. Class equals metric, and in our style.css, it automatically fills out the kind of wrapper for you to locally scope the CSS you're going to add to this specific extension. So only things within this type of extension will get this .metric rule, so you can just write your CSS from within there. I'll just say font dash size is maybe like 24 pixels, give it something a little bigger. So there's the number, and again, I can kind of change this number on the fly, so I could multiply this by 100 or whatever, and it gets bigger and bigger. It gets harder to read that way, so we want to add some formatting. So with this kind of ES6 setup, we can do kind of imports and use NPM packages and things like that. So what I'm going to do is actually, from my terminal, install a new dependency for my extension. I'm going to install D3. I'm going to save that so that people that are using my extension later for development they'll know to import D3, like when they run an install, it'll bring that package in. And specifically from D3, while that's loading up, I'll show some of the documentation. I want to use the formatting package. So we go to D3-format, and what you'll find is a bunch of documentation on how I can format numbers in different ways using the different types of strings. So we'll go back. That's still running. But even while it's running, we can kind of start to. Okay, good. It finished. And what I can do above my paint file before I export this function for painting is I can import dependencies. And so I can import from D3, and specifically I can import the exact module I want from D3. So I don't want to import the entire package of D3 when all I need really is the format function. So I'll import format function from D3, and instead of just putting the raw number into the display, I'm going to create a formatter we'll start with commas here just to show that. So I'll say, use a comma and format it based with that kind of formatter. And I'll save that. And now when I reload this page here, instead of it saying 255433, you'll see it has a nice comma there. And as I start to, add to that, the number will grow. There's all kinds of other formatting options you can do, including automatically putting in K's and M's and B's for millions and billions and things like that, or kind of limiting to numbers of decimal places and things. So it's a very good little tool for doing number formatting. So one other thing I want to add is just theming, just to show an additional feature we can do. So we'll add a toggle to this that'll just like switch the CSS of this whole thing from kind of a light to a dark display. So let's go ahead and go back to the code editor, and we'll go to our definition file again. And this time we're going to add another entry that's going to be theme. And we'll say ref is theme. Or I'll tell you what, we'll call this kind of dark theme. We'll call this dark theme. And we'll add a switch for this. So we can say the type is Boolean. The component is switch. The label will be dark theme. We did the ref, dark theme, and the options will be, first one will have a value of false, and the label will be light. And sorry, we should actually label this whole theme. And we'll add a second option here that is true. The label for that true option will be dark, and the default value will be true. So let's save that. And what's nice about this, maybe to kind of push this forward, kind of make sure this point has been made, is that this is all running with ES6 here. So what I can do, the default value is supposed to be false, not true, that's okay. So I could even like start to break out my code even more. Like I could have put that JSON in its own kind of file. Like we could say this was the theme options, .js maybe, and this just like export default, this array of options. Could have been, I'll just copy and paste it just to show how that would work. We'll take these options out, put them here. So we're going to export this by default, which means I could import up here, import theme options from /theme options, and now I'm putting the theme options here. So you can start to build, more modular code this way, leveraging ES6 imports and how those work. So now if I refresh this, we've got that theme data being stored, those options outside, and I can make that change over in that file instead of having to constantly edit the one giant definition file. So last thing we want to do is kind of consume this value. So we called it layout.darkTheme, and so what I want to say is basically let's get the chart container. So this is why we like to put a little chart container class here, is it kind of gives us our own place to add more global level CSS. So I'll say const container equals element.querySelector.chart-container, and we'll say container.classList. I guess we'll check the layout first. We'll say if layout.darkTheme container.classList. Is it add? Is that how you add a class?
Yeah, classlist.add or .remove.
And then we'll call this dark. We'll say else container.classList.remove dark. Something like that. Save this. Go ahead and come over here and look at what we got. Click on this guy. If I look in the actual browser at this container that's under here, whoops, let's find it. There's chart-container. There's no kind of dark class on it. If I change this, you see now it has the dark class. If I change it back, see the dark class is missing again. So now we're adding this class, which means we can add some rules to it. We did not come up with a design for this or ask our design team to, so this is not going to look great. But what we're going to do for this is we're going to say if you have a .dark thing, then the background color can just be black, and the color of the fonts will be white. And let's see if that does the trick. So we have the light theme going, and if I switch it to dark, look at that. There you go. Now I have a dark theme KPI versus a light theme KPI. Doesn't look great, but you get the point. So again, I think to reiterate what we kind of showed today, this qExt package allows you to take a more kind of modern software development approach to extensions. So it gives you ES6 bundling and allows you to use NPM for installing packages, and therefore you can kind of manage things that way and write more modern JavaScript, which has a lot of improvements over just vanilla kind of ES5 JavaScript that's supported today. There's some other nice things you can do, like the bundling of assets and having all the wiring hooked in. So all you have to do is go and edit the style or edit the paint function, etc. And then you can run this code, and it'll just continually bundle out a version that ClickSense can read for you, so you can just see those changes instantly while you're using some of these newer JavaScript development features. Cool. John, thanks for joining me today and helping me kind of demonstrate this. Again, for everyone that wants to leverage this, you can go to Axis Group's GitHub and find the qExt package. John and I are both in the ClickBranch Slack, so if you have questions, you can ping us there. Did I miss anything, John, or you think we're good here?
No, I think we're all set. I think we demonstrated a lot of really good use cases from this. If you're watching, I hope you can get a lot of use out of this. And yeah, again, reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns, or maybe want to see other features in the package, in the project.